Hello, my beautiful people. My name is Bulelo Mieni, and welcome to Create Black. This is an African lifestyle channel where we specifically talk about African spirituality, arts, and culture. So, today I want to talk about how poetry is one of the richest yet poorest art forms in South Africa. So, basically, poetry has a very rich and deep history in the past. Before colonization, basically poetry was used as for entertainment and educational purposes. It was also used as praises for kings and queens, and basically during that time you would do poetry because you were called onto doing poetry, or you just simply love the art form. And during the apartheid times, poetry then became more of an activism, you know, kind of art form, whereas you, you would basically speak your truth or speak what the nation feels at that specific moment in time. And to make an example of this, Uzwakhe Mbuli was known as the people's poet because he basically spoke about the things that were happening at that time. He wasn't the only one though, because there's also Ubabu Don Matera, who wrote amazing poetry, that basically spoke about the pain that people felt during the times of apartheid. And fast forward now to our current years, basically it's one of the art forms where people, they really really love it, but nobody really wants to pay for it. So unlike a musician, poets generally are not paid, or at least they are not paid their worth, because poetry is seen as something that, why would I pay for somebody to just speak words, whereas I can pay for somebody to sing or to play an instrument, because that seems more of worthy of a payment. And since poetry was more along the lines of activism, it becomes hard to actually charge the people that you are basically advocating for, you know. So what businesses ended up doing is that they would hire a poet, but then they would not have a budget to pay for the poet, which is kind of unfair. But obviously a poet would do the best they do, because most of the time these opportunities are disguised as, this is for, to get yourself out there, this is to make you a brand, this is to make you aware, this is actually publicity for you, because the more people know about you, the more people would want to get you into their gigs. But actually that's actually a way of, cheating people of their hard work. And it's so sad because poetry is actually the foundation of rap. Most people who rapped started at actually doing poetry, because essentially rap is rhythm and poetry. So in order for you to be a good rapper, you had to be, you know really good in putting words together. You had to be really good in creating a picture just using words. So that's where playing with metaphors, playing with similes comes up. And that's how essentially they built that into a rhythm, and eventually it became this amazing art form. So basically poetry is the mother of rap, right? But it is so disrespected. And another thing, during you know uh, during the times of kings and queens, when kings and queens used to rule African countries, is that poetry was mainly used as a way of, sharing knowledge, basically, telling you about the journeys of a specific person. So basically, it would be referred to as praise poetry. By the way, praise poetry still exists to this day because there are still places where kings kind of rule, but well, together with the government really, but they do kind of rule those places. So poets still have that same amount of respect, kind of, and I'm saying kind of in the most respectful way, because right now it's more of something that is done purely for entertainment and maybe to educate people, but it's not as much as it used to be in the past. So basically, a poet that you usually you know said poet usually said what's the word that I'm looking for? So basically, the poet was referred to as Inyosi. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Inyosi was basically a poet that specifically dealt with, collecting knowledge. So he or she was a library of knowledge of a certain king. So he would tell you about the lineage of a king or of a queen from the time of his great 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 grandfather. So he would tell you how they came to be, and basically create a picture for you and tell you everything you need to know about their lineage, about their achievements, about their, prophecies, if there were prophecies which were probably said about the king before the king became a king. So that person would collect all that knowledge. So this person was actually a library, and that brought joy onto people. And another interesting thing with Inyosi is that he was the only one, who could directly tell a king or a queen if people were not happy. He was the only one who had the power to, basically say whatever needed to be said. But of course, they would do it in a very creative way. But at the end of the day, the king will sit down and be like, yeah, nah, this person really told me I need to work on this, and that, because clearly the people are not happy. So a role of Inyosi was extremely important, right? And then you have Imbongi. Imbongi is what most people are kind of used to. It has a similar role to Inyosi, but not necessarily. Imbongi also does poetry. It also collects knowledge, but it's not specifically for kings and queens, but it can, be invited to certain functions. Not to say that Inyosi can't do that, but Inyosi was kind of put on a bigger pedestal because they were basically telling you about royalty, So Imbongi, on the other hand, would be invited, and they would tell you certain things, or they would make the day extremely enjoyable, right? And since during that time money was never an issue, it never was a problem. A person would just simply do it for the love of, of the art. And now, during this time in our history, people would want a person to come and do, make entertainment, basically create a nice, warm environment, and basically make people feel welcome and tell you about everything that you needed to know about a certain kind of place or a certain kind of show. Basically, they would tell you everything you need to know about an event. They would bring in entertainment, but of course, that becomes a problem now because, well, people don't want to pay. and they're forgetting that at the end of the day they do make a whole lot of money out of poets. But this is, well, things have changed now because of the whole pandemic, but they did make a whole lot of money out of poets, but then poets would not be paid because the value of a poet is unlike those of other, you know, other artists, basically. So that's why I'm saying that poetry is the richest art form, but at the end of the day, it is the poorest art form because people love it, but they don't pay. They don't want to pay the worth of actually, you know, getting this art form. They don't want to pay. And it's so sad because poets generally take a lot of time crafting their work. They don't just string words together. There's a lot of thought that goes into those words, and there's a lot of, sometimes redoing or rewriting. So basically poetry is an educational art form, but the value that's attached to it is not that valuable, in a sense of making a living out of it. Maybe as time goes by, people would make a living out of it, but for you to identify as a poet, you need to make living elsewhere, or at least you need to find a way or another art form where you can channel your poetry into, and then you can monetize it. Otherwise, if you're just gonna strictly be a poet, chances are you're never gonna make money. You're never gonna be able to, you know um make a decent living out of it. And as much as you don't want to do something purely for the money, but at the end of the day, everybody would love to make money out of what they love to do, right? So yeah, that's my 2 cents. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also comment. Up until next time, don't forget to be a grounding flavor.